What are some weird, real-life X-Files type mysteries? Story 1. One of my favorites is the Black Triangle UFOs seen over Belgium in the late 80s and early 90s. The Belgian military scrambled F-16s to intercept it, but it was captured on the radar jumping from something like 10,000 feet to 25,000 feet in a single radar blip. It was seen from the ground while being captured on radar. It's a very strong case. Speculation is that it was an advanced military project, but it seems ballsy to test it in public. That's over 10,000 miles per hour with almost no acceleration time. Holy crap. Scary to think that's probably first gear. Story 2. The Insatiable Terra, a French man who could not stop eating. He was said to have an incredibly large mouth with stained teeth and supposedly had a visible vapor rising off of his body. His parents kicked him out as a teenager because he was literally eating them out of house and home. He ate any and everything, including live animals, stones, silverware, anything he could get his hands on. The French military even tried employing him as a courier to smuggle documents by eating them. No doctor was able to find a cause or a cure to his appetite. He was eventually kicked out of the military hospital where they were studying him after falling under suspicion of eating a 14-month-old child that went missing from the same hospital. A reasonable suspicion, since they caught him trying to eat dead bodies in the morgue on several occasions. Story 3. Edward Leedskalnin was a 5-foot-tall dude who mined and sculpted 1 million kilograms of coral in South Florida into a home and attraction. He said he knew the secret of the Egyptians regarding moving heavy objects. That was out of control. Had a 40,000-pound piece balancing on an axle as a door that you could push open with one finger. When it needed repaired, they needed a crane to fix it. He installed it by himself. Never worked when he could be seen. Never told the secret. And no one has figured it out. Story 4. Skinwalker Ranch is a ranch in northeast Utah where in the 90s, the owners reported weird phenomena like giant wolf-like creatures attacking their cattle and taking multiple rifle shots without flinching, then apparently vanishing into thin air, floating orbs of light, Bigfoot-like creatures, cattle mutilations, etc. A team of scientists from the National Institute for Discovery Science included Colm Kelleher, who wrote a book about the occurrences, camped out on the ranch and reportedly witnessed much of the same, including what appeared to be windows opening into other worlds and a creature climbing through, poltergeist-like trickster activity, such as a surveillance camera being pulled down and gaffer tape being meticulously unwrapped from the cables, all while an adjacent camera picked up absolutely nothing. The ranch is on land infamous among the local native tribe as being haunted by skinwalkers, supposedly powerful shape-shifting sorcerers, and has a long history of weird happenings going back decades at least. The team of scientists, though they all experienced a lot of weird shit, were never able to gather any robust data to report back to NIDS. They got the feeling whatever they were observing knew it was being observed and did not want to be discovered. The book by Kelleher is Hunt for the Skinwalkers. Science confronts the unexplained at a remote ranch in Utah. It's a damned fascinating read. Story 5. A mysterious case from South Korea that had never been solved called the Frog Boys. About a group of boys, 5, who had gone missing without their corpses, remains, or any evidence that was found for about 20 years. After a massive on-foot police search in the area, nothing was found. However, 20 years later, their remains were spotted and discovered right by their homes, which had already been searched thoroughly. During this period, there were multiple theories and conspiracies. One professor personally tried playing detective and accused one of the parents of being the offender, with some logical contents and accusations. Story 6. Hallucinations at sea. So, this has been scientifically explained, but it's intensely creepy. Coming from a family of sailors, both my father and grandfather had similar experiences. My father described an incident where he saw floating coffins covering the entire sea. My grandfather described an incident where a swarm of crows were following the boat and people riding on motorcycles beside the boat. Story 7. The Monkey Man would have made a great episode. In May 2001, reports began to circulate in the Indian capital of New Delhi of a strange monkey-like creature that was appearing at night and attacking people. Eyewitness accounts were often inconsistent, but tended to describe the creature as about 4 feet tall, covered in thick black hair, with a metal helmet, metal claws, glowing red eyes, and 3 buttons on its chest. Others, however, described the monkey man as having a more vulpine snout, and being up to 8 feet tall and muscular. It would leap from building to building like a parkour enthusiast. Still, others have described it as a bandaged figure or as a helmeted thing. Theories on the nature of the monkey man ranged from an avatar of the Hindu god Hanuman to an Indian version of Bigfoot. Many people reported being scratched, and 2, by some reports 3, people even died when they leapt from the tops of buildings or fell down stairwells in a panic caused by what they thought was the attacker. At one point, exasperated police even issued artists' impression drawings in an attempt to catch the creature. The entire incident has been described as an example of mass hysteria. Story 8. For a mystery very close to the X-Files, you would need to look at something like the Paul Bennewitz case. He lived and worked close to the Kirtland Air Force Base and intercepted what he believed to be alien communications at what he called the Dulce Base. He very well may have been the target of a government operation where he was fed false information and documents verifying his alien hypothesis by intelligence agents working for the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. He was pushed to the brink and ended up in a mental health hospital, and his story is full of X-Files-esque intrigue, like photographs of landed UFOs he took from the air. He was a private pilot, being stolen from his house. There have been a few books written about it, the best one being Project Beta by Greg Bishop. Story 9. When I was a kid, like 2-ish, I had this dream of a man I called Big Daddy because he looked like a very large version of my dad. In the dream, he lifted me up over his head, held me there for what seemed like a few seconds, and then dropped me. I recall the dream vividly, but not the aftermath, which my parents filled me in on. They heard a super loud thud come from my room, so they ran in and found me several feet away from my bed, and both of my ears were bleeding. My bed was a car bed that was only about a foot off the ground, and it had walls on the sides to prevent falling out of it. There was no way falling out of my bed would have made that loud of a noise, let alone the likelihood of me falling out of it to begin with. I'm pretty sure I was abducted. After that day, I had extremely vivid nightmares about black panthers, not sure why that creature, watching me from outside my window or in the house sometimes. They happened a few times a month and completely stopped when we moved. I remember those dreams more than any other dreams I've ever had in my life. I tell this story all the time as my campfire ghost story, but I've always been tempted to get hypnotic regression therapy to see if I could look past the disguises of whatever it was that was in my dreams to see what was really happening. Story 10. The Hoia Baciu Forest in Romania. Visitors to the forest often report intense feelings of anxiety and the feeling of being constantly watched. Moreover, the local vegetation is somehow bizarre in appearance, like something out of a make-believe story with strangely shaped trees and unexplained charring on tree stumps and branches. The forest was named after a shepherd that disappeared in the area with a flock of 200 sheep. Most people who live near the forest are afraid to enter it due to the stories and legends that have been handed down. They believe that those who visit the site will never return back home. Many of the locals who have been brave enough to venture into the forest complained of physical harm, including rashes, nausea, vomiting, migraines, burns, scratches, anxiety, and other unusual sensations. I read one blog where they guessed that the presence of copper mines nearby may mean there are heavy metals down below, accounting for electromagnetic activity and other explainable causes for the weirdness. Story 11. The celestial phenomenon happening over Nuremberg in 1561. It happened randomly in Nuremberg sky, and it appeared as if it was a type of aerial battle with spheres, cylinders, and at the end of the spectacle, a black triangular object fell from the sky and a crash was heard from outside the city. This still does not have an official explanation. UFO conspiracy theorists everywhere, rejoice! Story 12. The Taured Mystery. A man shows up at an airport in Tokyo and his passport says that he's from a country called Torrid. When asked to point to Torrid on a map, he points to Andorra, but is confused because he had never heard of Andorra before. The company that he claims to work for has no idea who he is, even though he had copious amounts of documentation to prove it. He was held in a hotel room guarded by 2 policemen while the police investigated the case. He disappeared from his room, even though they were several stories up with no balcony. Story 13. The Battle of Los Angeles. Military guns and spotlights just shot up into the sky for minutes, and then it was over. No one has any clue what they were shooting at. It was over LA, and no one can give any reasonable account as to what happened. The military said it was a weather balloon. Most people say bullshit. Story 14. The Taman Shud case. A man washed up on Australian shores who is completely, and to this day, unidentified. Cause of death, unknown, and he was carrying a booklet with him that had a cryptid message that to this day is still without meaning. A suitcase believed to be his was also discovered, with odd objects inside that seemed to make no sense to this man's apparent possession of them. Some of the items being red felt slippers, a stenciling brush for marking ship cargo, and a pair of trousers with sand in the cuffs, along with makeshift weapons. Story 15. The Mary Celeste was an American merchant brigantine that was found adrift and deserted in the Atlantic Ocean off of the Azores Islands, Portugal, on December 4, 1872, by the Canadian brigantine De Gracia. She was in a disheveled but seaworthy condition, under partial sail with no one on board, and her lifeboat missing. The last log entry was dated 10 days earlier. She had left New York City for Genoa on November 7th, and on discovery was still amply provisioned. Her cargo of denatured alcohol was intact, and the captain's and crew's personal belongings were undisturbed. None of those who had been on board, the captain and his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and the crew of 7, were ever seen or heard from again. Story 16. There's one I don't hear often about, and yet it's happened right in the middle of downtown of a major Canadian city. There aren't too many videos of it because it happened before people had cell phones, but yeah. Montreal Mothership. This thing was above downtown, seen by reporters and cops, and the RCMP, along with NASA, even being called. It was massive and described as a mothership. Stayed up there for 3 hours, and the military and airports had no idea what was going on. It then moved east across half of the city and caused a power failure. There isn't much about it online, as, again, this happened in 1990. I'm bringing this up as I've lived there for a while, so it's one I heard a lot of talk about, but I think it's pretty weird. Story 17. After 18 years of teaching junior high school history, my dad became a trucker, long-haul type. He touched the contiguous 48 states. One time, he picked up a load from the defunct Hanford nuclear facility to take to Nevada or Arizona. Unlike all the other loads he hauled, this time he had a 2 black SUV escort. Has to stop at a way station. We'll handle this, sir. Has to pull over to check the load. We'll handle this, sir. Dad never found out what he hauled that time. Always struck me as odd, creepy government shenanigans. Story 18. The Hinterkaifeck murders. A few days prior to the crime, farmer Andreas Gruber told neighbors about discovering footprints in the snow leading from the edge of the forest to the farm, but none leading back. He also spoke about hearing footsteps in the attic and finding an unfamiliar newspaper on the farm. Furthermore, the house keys went missing several days before the murders. None of this was reported to the police prior to the attack. 6 months earlier, the previous maid had left the farm, claiming that it was haunted. The new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived on the farm on the day of the attack and was killed hours later. Exactly what happened on that Friday evening cannot be said for certain. It is believed that the older couple, as well as their daughter Victoria and her daughter Kazilia, were all lured into the barn one by one, where they were killed. The perpetrators then went into the house where they killed 2-year-old Josef, who was sleeping in his cot in his mother's bedroom, as well as the maid Maria Baumgartner in her bedchamber. Story 19. The spontaneous fires of Canneto di Caronia in Sicily. Basically, things just started catching fire in this town, and nobody could figure out why. It seems to stop for a while, but then will start again. Seems to always be electrical appliances, but the city shut down power and they kept happening. Scientists are sure it's because of static electricity, but nobody knows why it happens so frequently in one place. Pretty cool mystery. Story 20. Radio astronomer here. A lot of people by now have heard about the wow signal, particularly if you hang out a lot on Reddit, but there are many other strange signals we've heard from the sky we can't explain. One cool example is the Great Galactic Burper. In short, back in 1998, radio astronomers pointed towards the galactic center heard 5 loud bursts of radiation that were 10 minutes long or so, with 77 minutes separating the blasts. It was really weird. No one knows what caused it, and no one has ever heard this or any similar burst ever again. Pretty crazy stuff. Story 21. I'm probably late to the party, but this is an ongoing case in the UK right now. Some old guy traveled miles away from home to die miles up a mountain by a reservoir. He had no ID on him, and recent tests have found his blood was traced with an illegal rat poison not accessible in the UK. He has a plate in his leg from Pakistan, but doesn't appear to be of Pakistani descent. He was also dressed really smartly and asked locals for directions to the mountain in bad weather. More recently, a theory has come to light suggesting that he might somehow be involved with a plane crash that happened on the side of the mountain in 1946. Hence why that particular location and so far from home. Nobody has come forward to say he's missing either, which adds more light to the theory that perhaps he lost someone in the accident and wanted his final resting place to be where theirs was. Either way, it has the UK puzzled. Story 22. Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia UFO incident. Object fell from the sky at night and hit the water near a small fishing village. Local fishermen jumped into boats thinking it was a plane crash, but found no evidence of such. There was a strange foam on the water and a glowing object submerged. After a while, the object seemed to move up the coast and eventually disappeared. Shortly after, the military arrived on site. Lots of credible witnesses left with no answers. It's known as Canada's Roswell incident, and given that it was during the Cold War era, adds a bit of mystery to it. There was a joint U.S.-Canadian naval radar station in the nearby town of Shelburne. Check it out. Story 23. In 1994, 62 children at a Zimbabwe school saw a UFO landing and a man leaving the craft. Their accounts were so similar and unvarying that it is believed that they couldn't have made it up without inconsistencies in their stories. To this day, as adults, they still swear by their original statements. Story 24. The Montauk Project is an alleged series of secret United States government projects conducted at Camp Hero or Montauk Air Force Station on Montauk, Long Island, for the purpose of developing psychological warfare techniques and exotic research, including time travel. Jacques Vallée describes allegations of the Montauk Project as an outgrowth of stories about the Philadelphia experiment. Story 25. Angels Glow. The Battle of Shiloh in the American Civil War was pretty bad, even by the standards of the rest of the war. What makes it unique is that a number of the casualties later presented with a strange glow coming from their wounds. Even more surprising was that those soldiers whose wounds glowed had a much better rate of survival than the others. Thankfully, this has apparently been explained. Long story short, it was likely nematodes that express a bioluminescent bacteria that also has antibacterial properties. Story 26. Number stations. This keeps me up at night. A number station is a type of shortwave radio station characterized by unusual broadcasts, reading out lists of numbers or incomprehensible coded messages. The voices are often created by speech synthesis and are transmitted in a wide variety of languages. A few of them play old 1940s music with various accents reading numbers and dates. You can listen to them online, and it is very creepy. Story 27. I know it's common, but Roswell, man. Why was the first report that it was a flying saucer? If it was just a special weather balloon, why was there such a huge military presence over a large area? Why were so many people threatened to shut up about anything they saw? Why have many grandchildren come out about what their parents revealed to them, either later in life or their deathbed, that they saw non-human beings in the wreckage? Story 28. In the 80s, there was some guy who claimed to be in psychic communication with aliens, who kept churning out a series of the weirdest diagrams you ever did see, supposedly via automatic writing. They were unlike anything ever seen before on this earth. Unless, of course, you had ever seen the output from an early model of CalComp pen plotter. The fonts used by such a plotter, the way the pen strokes made a plotter would, well, you get the idea. Not much of a mystery there. My analysis was that he was Looney Tunes, and had access to a plotter. But I sure would love to see those diagrams again. They were passing strange. Story 29. The Black Knight Satellite. A mysterious black object in a near-polar orbit around Earth with no known explanation. Some claim it is an ancient extraterrestrial object left here 13,000 years ago. More likely than not, it is just space debris, left there by us. Story 30. Basically, the theory is that priests built a large underground structure, including a river Styx fashioned from boiling hot springs that was used to convince people they had entered the underworld to talk to a mystic Sibyl. How they built it, or how they knew about the springs, is quite another question. Not particularly spooky, but kind of neat.